This week I found a quote, and I think we all love a good quote, a reference from some famous figure or a bit of wisdom that's passed down. And unfortunately with the internet, one of the negative sides is that it's really hard to figure out some quotes. Did it actually come from that person or did it not? And I found a quote this week and I was trying to figure out who do I ascribe it to? It was 3 different names and I was looking into it and somebody actually had a whole article just trying to figure out where the quote came from. And the conclusion was, it's just a bit of cultural wisdom. It had bounced around between people through the ages in different forms, in different ways. Some were pastors, some were celebrities, sports people, until it reached a man named Walter Mitchell, who was a radio host who really made it much more broadly popular and widely known. And the saying was, a friend is someone who walks in when the rest of the world walks out. And I think I understand why it couldn't be attributed to anyone, because anybody could say that, but maybe not everyone does. I think it's a really powerful quote. A friend is somebody who walks in when the rest of the world walks out. Someone who stays when life gets rough. And if you live long enough, you will see a close family friend or a family member go through a serious trial. If you're a true friend, you'll stay, if they'll let you, as they'll let you, and you'll see them cope with their suffering. If they're in the church, you're going to see them address and grapple with deep spiritual questions too. And you may wonder, how do I help them? How do I walk alongside them? Just because you're there doesn't mean you're doing a good job of it, right? The Bible has an answer to that. In fact, I'd say there's practically a formula, if we look for it, a guide to help someone who is suffering. If you want to write down a title for this, the title for this sermonette is How to Walk Alongside Somebody in Trials. And if we're going to, the core of this is about somebody going through trials, and if there's anybody in the Bible who had been through trials, it would be Job. I would say more so than anyone in this room. And to make matters worse, Job did not have good friends. If I was going through a rough time, I would not want at least 3 of Job's friends. But the 4th friend, Elihu, the one who said the least, probably did the most. And that was a man I'd say you'd want as your friend. And I believe if we look at Elihu's example in Job, we can see a near step-by-step guide for how to be a friend to somebody who is suffering. So for the sermonette, I want to go through and derive 4 points from Elihu's example in Job about how to support somebody with agape love. So to start off, let's turn over to Job 32 and verse 2 to get started. And we'll just be basically in this same area for the entire sermonette. Let's turn over to Job 32 and verse 2. Verse 2 says here, Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his 3 friends, his wrath was aroused because they had found no answer, and yet they condemned Job. I'm guessing you didn't think I'd start off with that. But this is, I think, a really valuable point to draw out from the beginning here, is that Elihu didn't take sides. He was grounded. What we see here is a man who really worked to see the world for what it was and realized, okay, Job is at fault, and his friends are too, and this situation is not working. Job was justifying himself rather than seeking God's perspective, and his friends were just completely unjustly condemning Job. Both sides were wrong, and Elihu saw it. So if your friend is suffering, the first thing you have to do is be grounded for their sake. You can't be swayed by just empathy. Empathy is super important, but you can't just be involved in the empathy. You need to be able to point out and identify mistakes if they're there. And that's exactly what we see here, is that Elihu's criticism of Job was actually, it seems from the passage, exactly what Job needed. After Elihu's speech, actually, God himself comes down and repeats that same notion to Job, saying, hey, you weren't there when I created the world. And at the end of that, Job's trials ended, and he was blessed even more. I wouldn't say it was because of Elihu's feedback, but Elihu's feedback was pretty critical in the resolution of Job's trial. And if your friend is suffering, you have to be honest with them. If you have a quality friend, they're obviously going to understand that, and they're going to take it to heart. And your friend is really suffering, they might not. They might hate you for it, but at least you will have done your part. At the same time, you can't jump into condemning your friend, right? Job's other friends didn't know what was going on. They saw his suffering, and they theorized, and they imagined and theorized bad things about him. And if you read the rest, like the entire passage, a lot of Job is them just saying, you've done badly. And you don't want to do that, right? Because some people going through trials may not have done anything clearly, obviously wrong. They may not need feedback. The key thing is, if you're walking alongside them, and there is something you see that's clear and resolute, are you willing to see it for what it is? What Job needed there in his moment was a friend that was grounded, regardless of the consequences. Let's keep reading over in Job 32 and verse 4. Now, because they were older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, his wrath was aroused. So Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid, and I dared not declare my opinion to you. I said age should speak, and the multitude of years should teach wisdom. And what's funny is this comes right after it says he was angry, right? I mean, that's a lot of character to say he's angry, and he leads with this attitude of respect and humility for these men. To say, look, I've listened, I've waited, because you guys have more experience, you have more wisdom. I respect that, right? That's how he starts. And this is my second point. To be a friend to someone in need, you really have to take that approach of attitude of respect and humility. It doesn't matter how much you think you're right. You have to take that approach as to start off with. Elihu didn't start off thinking he was right. He didn't start off identifying issues right off the bat. He waited, he saw, he watched, he listened before coming to a conclusion, and then he entered the conversation and spoke up with an attitude of respect from the beginning. All right, and these are my first 2 points. And if you notice, these first 2 points are really pointing towards Elihu's attitude. Much of this is before he even starts speaking, or at the very beginning. And so far, he hasn't actually directly addressed Job. So for the third point, I want to look over, keep reading in verse 5 here in it'll be chapter 33. If you jump over the chapter 33 and verse 5, so just over one chapter, Elihu approaches Job here. And we can see how he does it. In Job 33 and verse 5, it says, if you can answer me, set your words in order before me, take your stand. Truly, I am your spokesman before God. I have also been formed out of clay. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Now, this is my third point. If you look at how he approached Job, he made his intentions and his goodwill clear. He didn't start with criticism. There was some empathy here. Maybe there could have been more, but his main message was saying, this is why I'm coming to you. This is the attitude and this is the approach. Before he gets into any serious criticism, he starts off with putting everything he says in context of that respect and that humility and these words that basically say, I'm on your side. I'm human like you. I am made of clay. I am not some superhuman. I'm not going to be harsh with you. I'm advocating towards God on your behalf. I'm with you. And so when you have a friend who's suffering and it's a sensitive situation, sharing your intent first is really critical because it puts everything you say afterwards in that context. There's no assumptions about where you're coming from or what you think. This kindness, it's critical. And so after he puts it in context, then Elihu delivers criticism. And this criticism, this feedback is, if you notice here in verse 8, it's actionable, it's real. And this is my fourth point. It's not an attack on a character. And honestly, if somebody's sensitive, they can take things as an attack on character when it is. So you can't necessarily judge the other person's emotional reaction as a feedback of your words, but it's something to self-evaluate. Elihu's feedback here was actionable and real. In verse 8, chapter 33 and verse 8, it says, surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sounds of your words, saying, I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. Yet he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? If you notice when Elihu criticized Job, it wasn't personal. He didn't say, Job, you've got terrible character. You're just a jerk. Elihu did not attack who Job was, but rather what Job had said, what he had done. And it was specific. It was like a quote. He rephrased. He said, Job, you said this. I heard you say this. Didn't make anything up. It was based on truth. And this is how you point out somebody's flaws in a healthy way. We can contrast it pretty clearly with some of his other friends, quote unquote, feedback. We don't have to turn there, but I can read to you what Eliphaz said. Is not your wickedness great and your iniquity without end? For you have taken pledges from your brother with no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have not given the weary water, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. So we know this isn't true, because if Job had been doing this and not repenting, he would not be described as righteous. Like, this is pretty egregious behavior. So we know that there's no truth here, which means Eliphaz would have had to basically imagine it, look at Job's suffering and say, there has to be a reason for this. Clearly it's this, and jump to a conclusion and imagined it and theorized and read into it. You also notice that this accusation is vague. There's no time, there's no person, there's no names. What are you supposed to do with that? Yeah, it's like, you are wicked and you've been nasty. When? How? What? Right? There's nothing he can really work with here. There's a night and day difference here between what Eliphaz did and what Elihu did. And to conclude my last point, let's read one last passage here from Elihu's speech. It's going to be Job 33, and let's skip down to verse 31. Job 33 and verse 31. He says, Behold, God works all these things, twice in fact, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of life. Give ear, Job, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. Elihu pointed Job towards hope, reminding him that God restores, right? He started off with good intentions. He gave him criticism. He ended in saying, look, God is not a God that's just going to shove you down. He brings people back up. There is hope. You can be restored. And we also see an attitude where he basically told Job, look, I've said these things. Speak back to me. Like, this is a conversation. I'm listening. He leaves an open door for Job to say, no, that's not fair, or I didn't mean it, or whatever it is. He leaves an open door for dialogue rather than a one-way correction. He says, I want to justify you. I'm not here to shove you down. I'm here to help you. A reminder. He was concerned for Job. And in this case, Job took it. I think sometimes we can, he put the chips out. If Job could have easily also been offended, shut down the relationship, push the person away. That's something that people will do when they're suffering and they don't want to hear something. And at that point, you got to just leave it for what it is. There's nothing you can do there. But the point is, you have to play your role and do what's right. So to conclude here, what we see in these 4 points is that, first of all, Elihu was grounded in the interaction and what was true. He didn't jump in and imagine criticisms, but he also didn't refrain. He didn't hold back from saying, hey, this isn't good. He focused on what was true. And when he spoke, he started with an attitude, an approach of respect and humility. He said he had listened and that he was willing to listen again. Then he introduced his intentions to say, hey, I'm on your side. I'm not against you. He made it clear he wanted good things for Job. And when he finally spoke up and gave corrections, he made it specific, actionable, and real, while also being open to Job's response. This is basically a formula from my opinion at least. If I see this, it seems like a step-by-step formula of how do you help somebody realistically in agape love, not just with empathy. Empathy is important. Like, you can see the empathy in his words there, right? But empathy alone may not actually help pull somebody out of what they need, of their trial, and give them what they need. So the next time that you have a friend who's suffering, or a family member, I think we can turn to this book of Job. We can look at Elihu's example, and there may be more points, things that he did that I didn't cover here. But I think we can look at that scripture as a formula, as a textbook, as a way to study how to help somebody when they're hurting. And hopefully that's helpful for all of us. Thank you.